Hello, everyone, and welcome to God Talks with Reverend Goodwin. Tonight, our special guest is the Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, who is the team leader for Faith Info at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Had an opportunity to meet Chris a few years ago when we were both invited to be representatives of folks under 40 in the UCC, thinking about a future of the church. Who could we be as the United Church of Christ in the next 10 years? And from there, I would say Chris has just become a staple part of my life in the United Church of Christ. She is an innovation partner. She is a troubleshooting partner. She's a prayer partner, an encourager. And not only do I think she sort of models that in my life, but I see her doing that in so many of the ways in which she is connected to our church. So join me in giving a God Talks welcome to the Reverend Dr. Chris Davies. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so happy to be here with you and with all of you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, very glad to have you. And I'm excited for people to get to know someone who is so invaluable to my life and to the life of the church, but in a more intimate way for folks who will be listening and watching God Talks tonight. Chris, I'm going to jump right in.
I'm ready.
My first question to you is, you're still fairly new to your role as the team leader of Faith Info. And of course, during this conversation, I'm going to ask you to share more about that. But as one of the hiring managers in the national setting, you are building your team. And I want you to think about one of your newest team members, whoever that person might be, and describe how might they describe who Reverend Dr. Chris Davies is.
Ooh, great question. Here's my aspiration is that I hope that he would say that I am consistent and fair, and in conversation with his future, with it as much as his capacity now. You know, when I think about the team that I lead, I'm thinking about it with a handful of different levels at the same time. The first is what is our shared work as Faith Info, Faith Education, Innovation, and Formation of the national setting, and who are the people on my team, and how can I lead with the awareness of them as a whole human being at the forefront, so leadership development and care and all of that, being part of what that is and what that can be. So, when I, and with a clear transparency of like, here's what we're doing together. How can we be really consistent all throughout? So I hope that he would describe me as someone who is present, attentive, and really caring for who he is in the world and who he wants to be, in alignment with what his portfolio is. I mean, work is worky, and like, even in this season, we're all in like this pandemic place where the most interaction I have with people is about work. So I really care. I really care about the people I'm working with, because I have access to, and this is about how we're all situated right now. We're working, but our social stuff is different, and we don't have access to that in the same way. So I've especially over the course of the last few months, I've really grown to love the people that I'm working with in like such a tangible way, that I hope that they feel that too.
Well, there's other questions, but I want to stay right where you are. I would say, as a younger clergy person choosing to serve the church, but on the national scale, so much of what you've been doing has been to provide resourcing for local churches and local church pastors who might also be in a place where their entire world seems to only be work.
I know.
And so you talked about that balance and consistency. So those pastors or pastoral leaders, folks who are kind of sowing into ministry right now, what would you say to them about that balance? Say a little bit more about how to find it. I know ritual is important to you. Like what are some things that you would encourage folks to tap into so that everything isn't just, quote, worky, as you say?
I know. I mean, it feels like a both and, right? Because I do this work because of my faith. I am committed to the institution in a particular way because I believe that the church itself can make a critical difference to the future of the world because of my faith. So work is as much work, and this is the place where my energy is going in this particular way right now, as it is faith. And I think that that's the struggle that a lot of faith leaders are undergoing right now, is that, like, how do you do the work when everything is all of this? And how could you possibly not do the work when everything is all like this? When all of the things, I could do the litany of things, and they are in my heart as I know that they are in your heart and the hearts of those who are watching. And every time I hear the litany of things, I'm also like, oh God, have mercy on our souls. How can we not act? And how can we act when we are in this place? And I think that the most clear thing that I could say to people who are also in this place is, you are the only tool that God has to do this. You must take care of yourself. You must take care of yourself, because no one else is putting you at the forefront in the way that you can for yourself. And you must continue the work, but in a way that is balanced and just and equitable. There has been so much expected of clergy right now. People whose jobs are threatened because of the decisions they've made, people who cannot possibly be a show production manager and a pastor and someone who's going to show up at the bedside. That's actually not available in a lot of places right now. And, holding the anxiety of a congregation who are seeking one little thing to control, and it's oftentimes the pastor. There's so much, and I know that there is someone listening who's tearing up hearing that said aloud. So this care of yourself, this capacity to breathe into being and know that you are not alone in this work, and that we will continue together, and that we need you as your best self to be in it. So just holding all of that in awareness with you and with so many other people.
Yeah, thank you for that. The invitation to kind of sit in that. I think sometimes we're running, that there isn't the option for a prayerful pause. So listen to her words. If you're watching this, try to find the prayerful pause.
Yeah.
I want to keep leaning in that same direction, Chris.
Sure.
In many respects, the work you are called to do is administrative. And you are balancing that it's a ministry. So can you talk to me about the tension between a job and a vocation?
That's a good one. I don't like everything I do. And what I do is the mechanism that enables me to be in a place to do things that are broader. I feel very called that as part of my work to help midwife in the Reformation. What is it that our faith will look like for our great-great-granddaughters? And how do I help bring that about? How do I make sure the messages of the gospel and the liberation that grounds us and is available to us is available for, is also available for my great-great-granddaughters who are just an idea at this moment, and yet may it be so. I know that my forebears in faith have carried it so that I have access to this and contributed to it. And it has morphed into where we are now, with God at the forefront, with Christ in the conversation, and with the Spirit guiding in ways that we do not have capacity to see. So even as I do the administrative tasks, I am prayerful that because we are doing these tasks centered in those things, that the tasks themselves enable a possibility that was not yet present, because of, and as a result of, and then we have a more just world, a world with an intentionality of equity, where the color of one's skin, or the way in which one loves, or the family that one has, or the class access that one has, is not a determinant factor in the outcomes of their lives. That's the world I believe in. That's the world I will work towards and co-create alongside God. And sometimes that kind of co-creation is really just kind of filling out a timesheet.
Wow. Yeah. Which then leads me to this really central question. Chris, what is the burning of your heart in this moment in your own life? When you wake up in the morning, what is the thing that you feel compelled to be offering in the world in which we're living, in the middle of a racial and a health pandemic, in the middle of constant death on screen and an election scare?
Yeah.
What are you called to do right now? Like, what's your most passionate kind of wandering in your heart?
right now, I mean, my job has shifted, much like yours, from I'm a wandering preacher to I am a talk show host. And, when I'm thinking about the space that we are curating, I'm thinking about who are the leaders that can contribute into this in such a way that the whole of our denomination beyond has access to the brilliance that's equally distributed. I'm thinking about that in the context of my job. I'm also always thinking about how is it my role in this ongoing movement as a queer white woman to be in conversation with other white folks about how we are showing up for racial justice. So I organize alongside Surge Northeast Ohio, inviting white people into the conversation and saying, come on, let's do this. We need you. And it is our work too, in thinking about the systems and the logic of white supremacy and all of that damages us too. So how is it that we can together create an equitable world so that we are partnering alongside and supporting movements led by queer and working class people of color?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to attach that reality and your sort of pushing for a more just world with this another image you offered us, which is a co-creator with God.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And take us back to Lil Chris, before you were the doctor and the Reverend and everybody else, sitting in a UCC church in Connecticut.
Yeah, I always say this. I always say this. I was baptized and ordained at the same local church in Connecticut by the same pastor. So I always shout out to this is my roots. I was in a little rural church in Connecticut, grew up into that. And I say that, I have been formed into faith by the highest ideals of the United Church of Christ at the time. This is true here, and the United Church of Christ has contributed into my being. And let us look together at where we're called to go.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So who was that little Chris's image of God? Was it, I want to be tongue in cheek and say, was little Chris already saying a co-creative narrative with maybe, but what was in that rural church in Connecticut in the United Church of Christ at that time? Mm-hmm. Tell me about your image of God.
So I was a little shit in Sunday school because I was challenging everything. And I remember that. And I have a lot of high esteem for the teachers that held space for that challenge. And in some ways, that kind of curiosity of theology is a tenet of the United Church of Christ. There is space for that kind of question. And, I was the one saying, well, this doesn't make sense. Tell me more. And oftentimes because I had I have Bible background, was in the conversation in a very tangible way. And when I thought about God, I remember being a teenager and frustrated that the cultural Christian expectation of God didn't match mine.
Wow.
I remember being a child and having dreams of this giant, loving, all-encompassing energy. So it wasn't necessarily the white guy in the sky, but how is it that this porous binary, and I mean that not it's not flat, it's just kind of the light and the dark, and now we even know better about how we say these things and what metaphors we use and all of this. But I remember being a child and having a dream of this texture of goodness. I don't even know how to describe it. And that is a dream that I have carried since I was a child, of this awareness of what it feels like to be in God. And an awareness of what it feels like to be disconnected from God. And I still pull from that memory when I'm praying and when I'm thinking about how am I called to who am I called to be and how am I called to lead? May it be with God in such a central way that I can even feel the texture of what that means,
Mm-hmm. Which is a very embodied way of thinking about the divine. But we both know sometimes the United Church of Christ can be a very intellectual way. So where then for you did you connect your very body with this understanding of divinity? How did those two things come together for you?
I feel like my faith formation has been a foot in and a foot out all the time. I often tell a story about being, in high school and forming at that point what we called the Gay Straight Alliance in this tiny rural town as the only gay in the village, or whatever. It certainly felt like that. And being in the Bible study, which touted the cultural Christian ideals of we're not, like, this is not okay. And me being like, but y'all, like, this is me. And not feeling, not understanding how there could possibly be a dissonance between the divine and who I am.
Wow, that's powerful.
It's a privilege too, because that kind of experience is not available to most teenagers. Most people forming into faith are doing so under the auspices of like a purity culture, which is damaging to women and damaging to men and damaging to like our theology. And like, for me, I feel so privileged to have grown up with a theology that I never had. I never had to challenge my way out of, and the challenges that I put on it now are challenges of like, it feels like a different level of conversation because it never was a thing to me that I couldn't be queer and Christian. Like, I want to make a world where that's true for everyone. Because the God that I know shows up in our creative expressions of love and humanity and embodiment with such incredible care for who we are created to be.
Yeah.
The God that I know is more likely to show up there in a queer bar than in a boardroom.
Come on.
So.
And, at the same time, the privilege isn't without the struggle, because what you named is, here you were, this kid doing the Gay Straight Alliance, but also a church who wasn't sort of, I'm not hearing the sense that they were trying to kick you out or that they were having private meetings about you, with some folks who.
Oh, no, this was the Bible study at school, not at church.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you reconcile, so you naming who you were in the context of your rural UCC church, and then trying to do this Gay Straight Alliance? What was the impact on your local church? How were you kind of forming and being authentically yourself in that setting?
I mean, I don't know how to be in community without also be organizing in community. Like, you're like this is consistently true. Wherever I am, in every circumstance of my life, I've been in the community and also organizing the community to be a best version of itself. I'm even thinking about, like, when I was still living in Connecticut, I was running the Connecticut Guerrilla Queer Bar for a long time, which was like a blast. I think it's still going, which is fantastic. And like, there's an organization of community in there that applied to the congregation. I am sure, because many of the people who have witnessed my growing would probably say I am a gentler version of myself than I used to be. I used to come on, and sometimes still can, quite strong. So I have so much gratitude for the teachers and the leaders who held space for me, being like, this is not okay, in the way that when one is attentive to the structures and the systems and the power structures that are present, I was and sometimes still am very tempted to do that kind of direct call out instead of like conversation in. And like, there's a time for both, a time for everything. And I would say the people who were in the congregation at the time were we need to be Owen now, like, how I knew how to say those things then is different than how I would say them now, with a lot more patience now than I had access to then. But that's what it is to grow. That's what this is why we follow the youth. They are going to say the thing. and they're going to demonstrate a way forward with a courageous nature of leadership. This is why, I'm really attentive to how queer seminarians are organizing now. It's incredible to me. That kind of a network across different schools is not one that I remember when I was in seminary. Like, what would it have been like if we met when we were still in seminary? Ooh, Lord.
Very different. What I'm struck by is, and you please, you can either try this phrase on, put it back, say nope, is a claiming of space. I think in many of our experiences, either there wasn't, or we didn't have the language or even the room to claim a space. And what I hear you saying a lot is that part of really your formation was you claiming some space, claiming space to be your authentic self, claiming space to have the relationship you wanted to have with God. And I want to know, where did that come from? Like, what wisdom figures in your life, what was kind of surrounding you that gave you that authority to say, I can claim this space. I can name it and claim that I'm worth it. And this is important to me. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Fantastic question. When I draw out the map of my life in that way, I think about my grandmother, who was this charismatic Jesus feminist. She was leading CR circles, and she had a complicated life that I learned a lot more about after she passed. And I still hear her voice saying to me, and I will be praying for you even when I'm dead. I think about, I was a kid that went to Silver Lake Conference Center, the formerly known as Connecticut Conference, Southern New England outdoor ministry site. And when I was going into fourth grade, and I went every single year all the way up until I could be on staff. And then I went back again. And that kind of space, again, formed in the highest ideals of the United Church of Christ at a time. A lot of times our outdoor ministry sites can implement the justice that we are hoping for. And youth are like, great, let's do it. So I was there every summer. I think about, I went to a women's college. I did my work at Smith College and was surrounded by women women in power, and learned how to by witnessing that, can step into that. That's not good language. By witnessing that, I have it. I'm not stepping in. This is who I am, and I give thanks to those who have come before in so many different ways. And every time I put my high heels on to step into the pulpit, I think about the women in ministry who were here before me. If a couple of decades ago, to put high heels on and step in a pulpit would have been scandalous, absolutely scandalous. And now, I put high heels on, I step into the pulpit, and it is something that I can do because of those who have come before. And I also name that in the United Church of Christ, I am surrounded by people who have been carving space for themselves and carving space for those that come after them. For as long as we've known how to identify, that's what we're doing. This is our highest ideals. There's always going to be bumps on the road. There's always going to be the erosion of time on us to make it happen. And again, I want to be connected to my ancestors. I want to be connected to my great-great-grandchildren. And I want to make sure that the ways I am moving now and the power that I hold now is something that I can be held to generations from now.
Chris, when you think about what you're being called to, how profoundly connected do you think this image of a co-creation relationship with God is tied in with that? How do you see those two things being linked?
I think they're absolutely necessary. If I'm going to try and do something by myself, then I'm not trusting in the community that is a more reflective version of God than I am by myself. And it's hard. like any of us doing leadership stuff know that it's hard. Because when you trust in the community, people are going to show up as people. They're going to show up with all their messy bits and all their hopeful pieces and all their anxieties and all their griefs, which are abundant right now. And that's what the community is telling us, and that's what we can move forward hearing really clearly. And sometimes I've been in dissonance with how I want to move forward. So the practice there that I am learning more and more as time passes is, how do I let go of my expectations of how this is going to work and hear really clearly the possibilities that are being offered. And some of those are spirit-led and some of those are community-led, and sometimes that's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the image of your grandmother, the image of outdoor ministries, the image of all of these sort of spaces where you saw a modeling. And again, I'm always thoughtful that someone's watching this who did not have that reality. And so for me to even say the quote, claim space, everything in them is like, because they've been socialized to believe, how dare you? How dare you do that as a person who is female identified? How dare you do that as a person who identifies as queer? Like, how dare you? You don't think you can do that. What would you speak into the atmosphere about the validity and affirm claiming space? How would you invite those who are watching to lay claim to some of that space that's been so critical to who who you are and who you are becoming?
Yeah. A few different things that feel really critical to say. And this is actually something I try and say every time my team meets as well. So it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is who you are in the world and your family and your priorities are created in God's own image. And that is more important than the product. That is more important than how you show up in service too. Like, who and how you are and the care of who you are is critical. So for those who are watching, trying to figure out how they take space. Just one step at a time. It is difficult. It takes courage. Leadership. I think about Mel Toomey, who said to me at one point, who's a leadership coach, leadership is stepping out in the face of no positive regard. And I think about how true that is and why that means those of us who are further from power and privilege are more equipped to lead. Because so often all of our lives are stepping out in the face of no positive regard. So what that means is that when we show up in the power and authority that we have claimed, inspired by God, affirmed by God, called into being by God, we already know how to do this. We already know how to do this.
Ashe and amen. Thank you for that. I think there are these moments where I feel like folks are watching this, and you can get that self-talk tape that tells you, "Oh, that's her.
I'm not enough.
I can't do that." Like,
let me tell you my self-talk tape. I will. Because this is the thing, today, this is the conversation I was having with myself along the lines of, you are not enough. Why are you you want this to be perfect in white supremacy, or not? Like, this is a product of, how am I internalizing all of these messages that tell me that I am only what I produce, that it has to be done with so much excellence that there's no room for humanity. Like, all of these are messages, and how could you possibly enough? You are not doing enough. There, look at the world. Look at the world. Look what's happening. Look at what happened. All to say, those tapes are in my head really clearly too, and I cannot imagine my life right now without the community I am centered within and without God. I was just talking with someone about how the needle of okay has changed so drastically that what is okay for me today would have been crisis 2 years ago.
Come on.
And now I'm just okay. Looking around, everything is on fire. I'm okay. And that would have been crisis 2 years ago, but now, like, the needle is way over here. So the collective trauma that we are all experiencing through various overlapping pandemics and how it impacts people differently depending on the color of their skin, who and how they love, and the class access that they have is something that we are all impacted by. And if, as we are paying attention, there's the invitation to care for ourselves, to show up in the long run. You know, this is going to be another 2 to 3 years of figuring out how we're going to be stable. So I've been hearing. So how do we adjust and put things we need in practice now for the long run? Mm-hmm. Because I want to be able to be here. And I do. I want to be able to be here to see the change as it continues to happen. I feel like I've been working towards this my whole life, and partially because of my faith. Not partially because, entirely because of my faith. Mm. I've been an activist because of my faith. Mm. That is true. And I want to see it. I want to experience it. I want to be in conversation with it as it continues to unveil a version of the world that is closer to the version God calls us all into.
As you were talking, Chris, this phrase that I want you to kind of finish, my faith compels me to what? And what's your what there? Mm-hmm. Your faith is compelling you to or toward what?
To be brave. Mm. And a lot of times what that means is being, for me, I'm socialized as a white woman. So that means that I need to be uncomfortable. It means that I need to step into those conversations instead of being conflict avoidant. Mm. It means that I need to breathe and claim my power instead of dancing all around the bits before and after the thing you're trying to say in the email. It means that I need to be attentive to the ways in which I am be attentive to the people I am aligning alongside and what that means. Because if I'm not attentive, then I'm going to fall into the patterns of societal power that continue to uphold systems that continue to push people down. Mm. And that's not acceptable to me. My faith compels me to act and to be brave and to show up.
Listening to you and then you just sort of perfectly led into this next question that I have. And so I'm going to throw a lot again, and I put on what works for you, release what doesn't. The question that kept coming up is, how do you, I'm going to say it as it was in my mind, how do you not get gobbled up?
That's a real question.
How do you resist the tokenization? I mean, you have these identities, female identified, the queer, age, all of the markers of some of the things the church is saying, we want more of you. We may not really want you, but we want more of you. How do you not get gobbled up?
This is a shared conversation. First of all. Secondly, I have to be attentive. I spoke about that before. I've learned a lot through working with and for Reverend Tracy Blackman. I respect her immensely, and she has helped me to find a clear no that enables my yes. Similarly, this is also a lesson I've learned from Reverend Elizabeth Dilley, working for Mesa and Clergy Wellness and all this, that the space where I can identify when people asking me to do something from the context of my gifts, or are they asking me to do something from the context of my identity? Because if they're asking for my identity, then they don't want me.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and you know it.
But in a more practical way, but what happens, Chris, when if you don't say yes, then, quote, the identities you represent just won't be at the table? How do you take that off of you? Yeah.
We don't. I have often been called an incredible networker, and It's because I want the people that I know and love and recognize the brilliance within to know and love and recognize the brilliance within each other. And what that means is that I have a kind of like a constant Rolodex of people with what they tell me that their skills are. And it sounds so diminutive. I really don't mean it that way. I just mean like I see where people are shining, and I want to help them shine in the fullness of who God created them to be. And that means when somebody asks me to be at the table because they want someone who's young, I have 3 or 4 other young people that I can call on and say, like, you know, and I've learned some clarifying questions along the way. What are you hoping I will bring? Why are you asking me? You know, what is it that you are hoping someone will bring to this table? You know, and if someone can say, well, you're young, then I can say, okay, this is really okay, I am not the right person for this, but tell me about some of the qualities that you are hoping someone will bring. And then I can help align, hopefully, help align what's happening with someone who I know has those gifts and invite that in.
Okay, I appreciate the empowerment to ask those clarifying questions, which I think sometimes when you're in a minoritized role, you don't feel the freedom to do that because you're just like, look, I got to speak up. You know, you talked about like, I'm going to be the one to kind of go out there. What happens when you need to say, no, I'm not the one today? So I think what I appreciate what you offered, Chris, is not just sort of the say no, but it is a no and. The no and I have other resources. The no and I'm actually making sure other folks are critically involved. And, you know, I think that's an invitation for us to think about who is coming alongside us as the activist, not just, well, we are the lone activist, but who's
it's not going to work to be alone. This was something I feel like I learned really early, and I'm blessed for that. But I am not where I am without so many people. And as other folks are in it, they are not where, you know, no one is where they are because of their own strength. The whole pull yourself up from your bootstraps thing is a myth. We know that. We know that it's a myth that actually serves people who have a lot of class access. And if we are not in solidarity with the people who are consistently in it alongside us, then we're missing the point. Like, you know, and this is true. I think about the disability justice tenet of there's nothing about us without us. And I apply that to almost everything. I try and apply that to everything I'm doing. You know, if I'm going to do something that is for local churches, then who are the local churches I'm in the conversation with?
I like that. I like it.
Nothing about us without us. If I'm gonna put out a program, then how am I testing that program before it goes out saying, here's what you need? I don't know what you need. You tell me what you need.
Yeah. I think it's the difference between service for and service with.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a reorientation of a way in which ministry has often been presented. You know, we're going into the community to do for or to do, you know, in that way it gives us the power and sort of benevolence. But I'm hearing you an invitation to walk alongside with, which also is an invitation to be ministered to.
Oh God, yes.
And not just be the person ministering.
Yeah. I mean, I am grateful for the people who have pastored me. And you are one of those people.
Thank you. It's my privilege. I feel equally pastored. Which actually leads me to my question, Reverend, to the REV before the DR, and I want you to talk about both. But talk to us about your call story. Like, where was that moment where that rambunctious teen who was flipping over tables in that little rural church in Connecticut? What was then the moments that you kind of went, oh?
When I was a teenager, I served on the board of the Connecticut Conference and was there as like a youth delegate, a rep or whatever they called it at the time. And I think at one point, Davida Foy Crabtree asked me, have you ever thought about ministry as a career? And I looked at her, I was like, no, no. And then I went to college and I was activated in high school by the comprehensive sex education curriculum stuff that the United Church of Christ did with OWL. So in high school was going down to DC and working alongside a bunch of people to think that through, and then went to college, put all that stuff in motion, started studying social movements and studying. And I remember writing a paper about how the United Church of Christ, and this is dating me in the history of the UCC, and I am okay with that. But writing a paper in college about how the United Church of Christ's, at that point, Still Speaking campaign was activating all the intentional markers of social movements and like doing a using the Still Speaking campaign as a way to say this is a movement that's happening, which was it was, I mean, all of which to say, I decided to go to seminary after college because I saw the way faith activists and clergy in movements can move the needle. I saw that clergy have access to this moral foundation that allows the movement to go forward in a different way. And I think about how that works is that when I'm preaching in a congregation that I know is purple, and what I mean by that is that it's like bipartisan in its own way. I am preaching in a way that speaks to the social justice tenets that I believe because of my faith, that is grounded in the scripture, that there is no way to not see clearly the faith that calls us into action. So I went to seminary and I was like, this is great. I'm not going to be a local pastor. And then ended up working in a church the whole time I was in seminary, and fell in love with the kid. Like, I fell in love with doing youth ministry. And then I applied for an associate and again got to do youth ministry. And I fell in love. I just fell in love with these youth, because I do believe that the youth are leading us. I believe that they have so much to learn and they have so much to give. And I just watching that transformation because of faith continues to inspire me, So I really love them.
Yesterday, I was having a conversation with one of our board members who was saying, I wonder if my generation, basically, there's just no more room for us in the UCC. Maybe you and your ideology, it was a conversation about an ideological frame towards this inclusion and progression and all, maybe I just need to move out of the way so that can happen. And I was struck by that dichotomy, right? That there's this, and then there's whatever we're trying to birth, and then you're naming the youth. And anyway, as I was getting off the call, I asked myself, one day, am I going to be on the other like, am I going to be on the other end of the call going, maybe I just need to get out of the way, but I do wonder for you, how are we bringing everyone? Or are we? I mean, it's a pointed question, but so you're talking about the youth. I think
you're asking me the hard questions here.
You have this faith info, like you're called to ministry. You're leading a team that's really prolifically offering so much to the entire church, and I think in a very formative period of time, in a way that you wouldn't even have been doing a year ago. I mean, the materials would have been there, but this is like multiple times a week from your area is coming things that are shaping the church. How are we bringing everybody to the table, Chris? And I know that's not just your responsibility, but I'm asking kind of for your insight in that.
By the grace of God.
Such a preacher.
It's true, though. It's really true, though. It's so true for me, anyway. Is that how do I have deep compassion for people exactly where they are? How do I hear them to where they want to go? So if some, in that board member who says, "Do I just need to get out of the way?" What I'm hearing is a fear of irrelevance. And it's just like, absolutely not. Like, you are a relevant part of this community. You are needed in this work. Your your contribution, even if it's relationship with people that have access to different skills and talents than you have, and your encouragement and your care and your like, and it's not just all the stuff in the background. It's also sometimes someone being able to say, I have been in that pit. I have been there. I remember what it was like, and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what we're experiencing now, this kind of collective trauma, is something that our great grandparents had access to. This kind of, like, and not had, that's a bad way to say it. Our great grandparents have a shared memory of what this is. We don't, you know, so I have learned a lot listening to my elders talking about their parents and what they did. I continue to learn a lot listening to my elders talking about how they made the decisions they made, recognizing that they did the best they could in the context as it was at the time. And I can tell you, there is nothing that lightens my heart more than listening to an elder speak about how their own transformation has occurred. You know, because if they're still, you know, if someone is still, if I were, even me, if I were still reaching back to the language I had access to when I was a teenager, to the, you know, to the movements I was a part of when I was a teenager, to the work that was happening when I was a teenager, then I would be so disconnected from what's happening now that it would appear irrelevant. And that's the fear, right? Is that I did this then, and now I don't recognize what's happening. And beloveds of God, like, we need you. We need you in this work. Like, come in, come in. We'll update you. And I think about the laborers in the vineyard, right? Like, the kingdom of heaven is not only available to the ones that are in it the entire time. No matter when you show up, Jesus is there saying, thank God you are here. We need you to go forward. You've contributed to where we've gone, and we couldn't get here without you. So, I mean,
you're preaching now, girl. Keep going. I'm ready.
It's true, though. I mean, we have such a, and you know this, in the United Church of Christ as an entity, this is true. In the wider movement, this is true, where the call-out culture, you know, for better or for worse, people are people. People are people, and the compassion that they come with, the willingness they have to get involved, they're going to be people-y, as my dear friend Elizabeth Dilly would say. People are going to be people-y no matter what we do. So how do we meet them where they are? And also being clear with myself and inviting you to be clear with yourself. How much capacity do we have to meet them where they are now? Because if I go into a room without the capacity to meet someone where I am, I'm going to do damage to them too, as well as me.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's different people's work at different times, and it's a relay. So I am gifted with a community that I can say, I am not the right one to have this conversation right now, but could you take it on? And someone saying, yes, I can do that. And I am gifted by the trust of other people saying to me, I am not the right one to have this conversation right now, but could you take it on? And me choosing yes. And me saying yes. You know, because that kind of, and this goes back to the co-creation bit. This goes back to that we need each other in community to bring about the community, the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
You listen into, I think about, and we need the dreamers. You know, we need to be imagining what is the kingdom of God.
Right.
I was listening to Angela Davis speak the other day on a panel, and she was talking about how freedom is not achievable. Like, freedom itself is not an end goal. It is a constant process, and that aligns with how I understand this work too, that the place that we're going is one we have to continue working towards. And when we arrive, we will learn that there's more to do.
Right. Part of how you and I got to know each other, as I mentioned at the very beginning, was we had a chance to be a part of really the strategic visioning for the United Church of Christ. And one of the pinnacle parts of that was a relevant church, a transformative church. When I started God Talks, I posted in a particular group advertising that it was happening. And there was a blog written about it, and someone immediately posted, waste of my time. This would be irrelevant. And
how is God irrelevant?
Well, I immediately sort of responded to that person and said, thank you for your honesty. Thank you for the challenge that these conversations be relevant, that these conversations be something that can actually contribute. Because I own that in your experience, the church has actually been irrelevant. It's been irrelevant to your needs. It's been irrelevant to seeing you, to knowing you. Chris, you could be doing so many other things with your life. You are a gifted woman who has the ability to serve the world. And I want to be very clear. I actually still think it would be committed to justice. I still think you would be bringing folks in. I still think you'd be creating opportunities. And you've chosen, because I want to say there's the call, but then there is the yes. Yes. You've chosen to say yes in a thing that a lot of our peers would say is antiquated and irrelevant. Big question. But what is the relevance of the church to you?
That's a great question.
How is it relevant to the world right now in what we're experiencing?
I have a conversation every day with someone who is not connected to church, wherein I show up in the way that I'm called to show up. And someone says where someone is just so odd that a pastor can be like me, because the cultural Christianity has provided such a narrative of trauma.
Yes.
The Christian supremacy has provided such a narrative of abuse that, my choosing to be within it, in the fullness of who I am, is a radical act.
Wow.
And I know that when I look around my age cohort and I look at the Pew reports and when people, I'm spiritual but not religious, I haven't access to this, whatever. If that's all great, to me, I don't proselytize. I do say that I don't know how I would live without my faith, especially now. And it's not my work to tell you how to live your life. It is my work to show up and live mine in the context and the metrics of what I know to be right for me. For me. I don't know that the church will be relevant. I don't know that we're going to be doing this like this in 30 years. What I do know is that right now, this is right for me and by God. I do know that I cannot imagine contributing to a just world for all, without the people I am in relationship with, without the church that has called and formed me into the person that I am today, and without the God that has continually pushed me outside of my own comfort in awareness to that which is happening all over the place for collective liberation. And I think that the release of expectation that I know how to do it individually, and instead a witnessing of how our communities are attentive, is an opportunity for all of us to learn and grow and be where we are in the authentic nature of where that is, inside the church, outside the church, terrified of church, because I know there's somebody watching right now who's like, I'm taking a step by watching this. And that no matter where someone is on that journey, the gospel, the word beyond words, however we describe that, the divine will carry me, will carry you, will carry folks who have all sorts of different words to describe what that means for them outside of the institutions that humans have made for ourselves to try and limit the way God works in the world. And I guess I just have to be attentive and uncomfortable in the unknowing. And that's life, really. If we think that we know where we're going, then Anyone watching now knows with beyond the shadow of a doubt, as a result of these past few months, that is no longer an option that's available to us. And if we thought it was, that's a response of our privilege.
That leads me to my last question for you, Chris, and it's very much so connected to what you were just saying. Even in this past week, I've had an opportunity to talk to, I think I'm going to use the phrase activist clergy, who look at my job and look at your job in the national setting, and they think, if I were to be a part of the institution, even towards formative change, somehow I would be abandoning my ministry. And can you say something to that? Because I think that if people like you aren't in the national setting of the United Church of Christ, if folks like you aren't leading teams in these settings, not only in the UCC, but the Episcopalian Church and the Methodist and whatever, I think we are missing a part of who God is calling us as the institution to be. So any words of wisdom for a person who right now is considering that conference job, or maybe they see a national setting posting, or maybe their denomination that has nothing to do with the United Church of Christ is sort of calling them for, but they're feeling like, I'm not going to abandon ministry to go do the White Tower stuff.
I hear you there.
What would you say?
No, we need people on the inside. We need people on the outside. We're going to make these systems move towards justice. We need people all over the place. And there's got to be healthy relationships in between. I think about, and I always think about trust as a measurable thing, and I'm thinking about the work of Brene Brown, who's a social psychologist, that says that trust is measurable through boundaries, through all of these different ways in which you can measure trust, which I used to be able to ramble off right now, but I can't. And having trusting relationships with activists who are calling me to be attentive, and that trust goes both ways. So that also means that I am in relationship with the activists and the faith activists on the outside who are also trusting me when I'm saying the system, I'm trying to move within this system in such a way that this can be different a few years from now. And if I pull that now, then I'm not going to be able to be here. And it's complicated, it's hard, it's messy, and it's just like every other institution in that way. We need people on the inside, we need people on the outside, and the relationships between and the ways in which we are holding each other accountable to the future of our collective faith, to the future of our collective work together, is essential. And that, I will say that is what my mentors have told me consistently, and I appreciate that. It is necessary. And I am grateful for the folk who have made it possible for me to even be in this place. I think about when I first interviewed for a job at the national setting, I was like, there's no way they're going to call me. I'm too radical. I am way too radical. I remember, because we were talking about this when it was happening. I was like, whatever. I'll interview, but I also have plans C, D, E, F, G. And then showed up as a full radical version of myself and was shocked when it happened. And so I guess for the people who are watching now and considering the next step for you, no matter where that is, I would say show up as the full version of yourself and trust in God. Because God is present. The Spirit is present. Christ is walking with you each step of the way in an embodied way. And you are not alone in this journey. You are held by community. There are people who are cheering you on. There are people who are walking alongside you or moving alongside you on this path, that it's not only up to you and we need you. Both are true. Both are true.
If I had a proverbial mic, I would just I would say you just dropped it. Chris, thank you so much just for your time tonight, just for being available to share so much of who you are. One of the things that each person who I have an opportunity to spend some time with on God Talks, I ask them to tell us about an organization that those who are watching can sort of sew into, that's doing some of the work that's dear to them. Tonight, you have talked about Surge Ohio. Can you say a little bit about the organization so people can join you in making a contribution?
Absolutely. I live here in Ohio, which is a swing state, which is a state wherein the extremes are very present between wealth and poverty, between where people live and how they adjust. And I think that the work that Surge Showing Up for Racial Justice does in working in calling white folk into the work and keeping us in the work in community is really critical to help move not only the systems here in Ohio, but the systems in the country that look towards these swing states to make a difference. So that, to me, that's why I do this, and I do it alongside and held very accountable by Black and Brown led movement organizations in this area. We are in deep relationship in that way. So please consider donating into Surge Ohio. And the link down at the bottom is for the work happening in Northeast Ohio. We also have a campaign right now about redistributing white wealth, which is so cool. And you can learn all about it on the website.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, I always end these with a blessing to the folks who are sharing of their time and their talent. And as you were talking, I am listening to you, and I'm trying to listen to spirit for an image or a phrase. And probably about 20 minutes in, I got an immediate image. And I'm just going to share with you. The image that I got, the blessing that I have for you, was of the women who showed up to the tomb. And that was a hard place because society wasn't expecting that they would have the good news. They weren't expecting that they were the embodiment of it, or that they had the privilege or even the space to claim that they could say that this reality had occurred, and yet God chose them. So may you be blessed in the moments that you, my sister, are truly called to show up at the tomb. To show up and maybe be revealed the good news before the good news has been public to everybody else. And may you have boldness to go to those who have named themselves as disciples, to those who have named themselves as the truth bearers, the ones who have named themselves as carriers of the Spirit. And yet God has chosen you in that moment to say that which maybe you could not believe and or see. The Spirit, she has spoken, and I am here to provide a message. That she is yet alive and yet well. So my first blessing is that may you have the boldness to go to the tomb. The second thing I heard the Spirit speak to me is that the fascinating thing about the women at the tomb is that there's an assumption that maybe something or someone else rolled the stone away. But I heard the Spirit saying you actually have the spiritual authority to roll the stone away. So may you also have the prophetic imagination that when you show up to the tomb, because you have been listening to the move of the Spirit in our world today, may you not be intimidated because the stone is still there. May you also not wait for someone else to do the work of rolling the stone away, but may you know that God has given you the spiritual authority to show up to the tomb and say, "Be thou removed, stone," and know that the stone will move. May it move in people's lives. May it move in their ministries. May it move in their doubts. May it move in their fears. May tonight the words you have sown into the children and the people of God be like you showed up to somebody's life and there was a stone and you said in your words, your truth. And my sister, the stone was indeed moved. So I love you. Keep being a stone mover. And the only thing I ask before I let you go, Chris, and then hold on for me, I'll take you off and come back, is, as soon as you get to that tomb, call me. Call me. I'm going to listen. I won't be like them waiting in some room down the street, girl. I will be there. Text, call, ping, Instagram me. I want to know what the Spirit said.
I will.
And I'll go share good news too. So thank you, Chris. Love you very much. I'll see you.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here. Just see you in just a few seconds. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed my time with Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, and I hope that you will join me in celebrating and watching as the Spirit uses Chris to go to those tombs and roll away those stones. I invite you again to join Reverend Dr. Chris Davies in contributing to Surge Ohio. Please make a donation for the collective work of what they are doing. Remember, God Talks is now every other week, so I will see you again September 14th. Until then, stay blessed.